Hey folks, you're listening to episode 20 of RFA Insider.
That was Amy and I'm Eugene, and today on RFA Insider we'll speak with Mark Clifford, who's the president of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, about the trial of media mogul Jimmy Lai.
Then on Podcast Free Asia, we'll spice things up because today is Kimchi Day.
Then on the rundown, we'll sock it to ya as we discuss tainted alcohol and the politics of martial arts governing bodies.
Sock it to ya?
What, are the cool kids not saying that anymore?
Were the cool kids ever saying that? Okay, don't answer. Hold that thought. RFA Insider starts right now.
靚生乜女話呢？咪嚟提，tập trung vào chủ đề。딴소리하지 마。
Jimmy Lai is a detained Hong Kong media tycoon who founded the Apple Daily, a newspaper that served as the voice of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement up until it was shut down in June 2021. In 2020, Hong Kong police raided the offices of the Apple Daily and arrested Lai on charges of violating the newly passed national security law.
Specifically, he's accused of publishing seditious materials and colluding with foreign forces after visiting Washington at the peak of the 2019 protests to meet with Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
So today, to talk about this case, we're going offbeat with Mark Clifford, a journalist who worked closely with Lai in the Apple Daily's final days and who's now the president of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong. So welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so first of all, first question, why is the government chosen to make an example out of Jimmy Lai?
That's a great question to start with. I think Jimmy has something that, or a combination of three things which really frighten the Chinese communist leaders. First of all, he's rich. He's got resources. Second of all, he had a media platform, so he had a megaphone. And I think we all know how much the communist parties in general, Chinese communists in particular, fear media because they see it as a way of shaping public opinion. And third, he's got principles. His Catholic faith underpins so much of what he does. So this combination of money, media, and a deep spiritual faith, principles that he's willing to die for, just making someone that the Chinese Communist Party is determined to silence. The fact, of course, that he had millions of readers of his newspapers and magazines in Hong Kong and Taiwan, and that he had an avowedly free market, pro-democracy agenda further unnerved the Chinese. He's a really effective communicator. He's a kind of opponent that they haven't really run across before.
So can you tell us, why is Jimmy representing himself in his trial?
Well, he does have local lawyers, but he has chosen to speak because I think he wants the world to hear what he has to say. It's the same message. I've known him since the early 1990s. As you alluded to, I was on the board of Next Digital, the media company that published Apple Daily and Next Magazine. And he's always, pretty much from the first time I met him in 1993, been singing the same tune, which is Hong Kong is a place of freedom. It's a place of rule of law, free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, and the Chinese promised that was going to continue, and Jimmy wants to hold them to their promise. And I think what he wants to do is show the world that he is a man of nonviolence, but who believes in freedom, and he's willing to sacrifice his freedom for the freedom of Hong Kongers and others.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about that. So it would have been so easy for him to kind of just fall in line with what the authorities were telling him to do and just keep making lots of money with his media companies. So why did he choose the hard route? Why would he choose to be defiant to the authorities and cause all this trouble for himself?
Well, coincidentally, I have a book coming out in 2 weeks, a biography of him, and it's called The Troublemaker, because it's his own words. He calls himself a troublemaker. I mean, he's a stubborn guy. He's an iconoclastic guy. He's a maverick. I mean, he was an entrepreneur in the clothing business with Giordano and manufacturing clothing for decades before he got into politics. So it's kind of just who he is. He doesn't like being pushed around. I mean, he was an immigrant. He came at the age of 12, escaping famine in China, worked his way up from living in a factory to quickly owning a factory. And he just really believes in freedom. That first time I met him in 1993, I just moved to Hong Kong a little more than a year earlier. And he talked to me about why he was going to start a newspaper. And honestly speaking, it sounded a little Well, let's just say ambitious. To me, but he knew that everybody else was withdrawing in terms of confronting China, all the other media owners. So he looked at it as a business. Of course, he really believed in democracy, believed in freedom, was really galvanized by the 1989 Tiananmen protests. But he realized that he had a business opportunity. And then once he got into it and he saw the reaction of the millions of Hong Kong supporters, readers, people who came out in the streets in 2003, 2014 umbrella movement in 2019, he kind of unwittingly emerged as a leader. He never wanted political power, but he did want to speak truth to power.
Okay, I've heard that this trial that he's currently embroiled in is it's been described as a sham trial. So what do you expect? Do you agree with that, first of all? And second, what do you expect the outcome of this trial to be?
Yeah, I think it's a sham trial, a show trial. To call it a kangaroo court, I think would be a slur on kangaroos. He's going to be guilty. I mean, it's just, it's a foregone conclusion. He is seen by the leaders in Beijing all the way to the very top, to Xi Jinping. He's seen as the mastermind, the black hand of the protests in Hong Kong. It was almost as if the national security law that he's being tried under was written for Jimmy Lai, to get Jimmy Lai. So I, of course, expect a guilty verdict, and I expect a lengthy sentence for a guy who's 76 years old. It's tantamount to a death sentence unless the international campaign to free him is successful, which I think it will be.
Should he be convicted? What would that then say about press freedoms in Hong Kong?
Well, I think we know where press freedom stands in Hong Kong, which is it's a thing of the past. It's receding into the rearview mirror. I was on the board of directors, luckily not in Hong Kong, the second time that they raided Apple Daily, sent 500 police in, rounded up a number of our employees, 6 of whom, besides Jimmy Lai, are still in jail, even though they've pled guilty, being held hostage. I mean, there's no more press freedom in Hong Kong. You can be mildly critical around the edges, perhaps, but press freedom is no more, sadly. So
Apple Daily is openly engaged in political activism, and I think one word that always pops up in describing its reporting was irreverent. So it was on Beijing's radar far before its forced closure. Was what happened next digital shuttering and the company's executives being arrested always a possibility to leadership, or does it go beyond what you imagine that the future of press freedom in Hong Kong might look like?
No, what happened was so much worse than any of us imagined. I think that Jimmy and others knew that Beijing was going to continue to pressure the publications, but the thought that you'd have 500 police come in and just basically cart away computers and press materials, and eventually a few months later, just take away everything, just strip the building, take a listed public company listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and essentially steal it from its shareholders by freezing bank accounts, making it impossible for us to even accept payments from our 600,000 digital subscribers. I mean, all this was beyond imagination. And if you told me 5 years ago that Jimmy Lai would have been sitting in jail in solitary confinement for more than 1,400 days it's coming up on 4 years now, I would have thought that you were nuts. I mean, it's so far beyond anyone's imagination that it's hard to describe. And I think, we're all still in shock, even though it's been 4 years since the national security law came in and since, a few months after that Jimmy was jailed. On the other hand, Jimmy has been a long-standing critic of Beijing. As far back as 1994, he wrote a piece, I think quite correctly, attacking then Premier Li Peng, who was regarded as the butcher of Beijing for his role in killing hundreds, perhaps thousands of Chinese civilians in June 1989. So, on the one hand, Jimmy and his team have been pressing, as you say, they were irreverent. Not sure I would necessarily say it was an activist newspaper, but certainly Apple and Next were, very, I guess, sympathetic in many cases to the movement that was going on. Not uncritically so. They clearly weren't pro-independence for Hong Kong. They definitely were espousing nonviolence, but this was not a middle of the road neutral newspaper.
Okay. Now I want to go back into press freedom. What would have to happen for Hong Kong to regain its press freedom? And is there any hope at all, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I think there's hope, but I mean, I think you'd have to see a wholesale change, not only in Hong Kong leadership, but in the Chinese leadership. It's hard to imagine under anything that we've seen under the Chinese Communist Party for the last 75 years that Hong Kong could once again enjoy press freedom. It's really sad because it's so easy to destroy freedoms, to take them away, to shut newspapers, and it's so hard to nurture press freedom, to nurture the kind of open discourse and discussion that press freedom requires. We did see it for a brief period of time in the spring of 1989 in mainland China itself, but in Hong Kong's case, press freedom had developed over the in fits and starts, but over 156 years of British colonialism, and then for much of the first 20 years of Chinese rule, after 1997. But again, it's not like a light switch. It's not like you can just turn on if we had a, it's unlikely, but if there were a wholesale change in government, it's not like Apple Daily can just start again tomorrow. I mean, and we had thousands of staff. They've scattered, around the world into other professions. We had printing presses. We had buildings. I mean, all that was stolen from us. And Apple, of course, and Next were, of course, the largest, but they weren't the only truly independent press. I mean, you had things like Stand News, which have also been shut down, and some of its key people jailed. So, it's easier to wreck something like press freedom than to see it grow. It just doesn't grow quickly. I am convinced, though, that most Hong Kong people support democracy. 6 out of 10 Hong Kong people always voted for pro-democracy candidates from the first open territory-wide elections in 1991 until the district council elections in 2019. I mean, there's a clear majority, always over 50%, of people voting for pro-democracy candidates. And I think if Hong Kong were free again, that DNA, that element of Hong Kong would reassert itself, and you would see press freedom and open press springing up again.
Okay. Moving along, one of the aims of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong is to defend political prisoners, such as Jimmy Lai. Could you tell us some of the ways that your organization is working towards that cause and how people like our listeners could help?
Sure. First of all, let's look at the numbers. In the last 5 years, more than 1,900 Hong Kongers have been put in prison, convicted and imprisoned on political charges. Another 7,000 or so still have charges hanging over them from the 2019 period. So the numbers are large. We've focused on a handful of high priority or kind of well-known political prisoners. Jimmy Lai, of course, is the best known. But there are others, Chow Hang Tung, Lee Chuk Yen, Gwyneth Ho, Joshua Wong. I mean, the list, there are a lot of people, and we need to try to remember all of them. We're very active. We're based in the U.S. We're active especially in Washington, D.C. and in London, in the U.K. We have primarily worked through the legislative process and with the governments as well, trying to build international support to hold China accountable, to make it pay a price, Hong Kong and China and its leaders to pay a price for the way in which they've broken China's promises to Hong Kong, that it would have a high degree of autonomy for 50 years. So, we do everything that activists tend to do: work through the legislative process, work talking to government officials, writing articles, doing media appearances. We also do non-conventional things. We've done a number of large-scale wall projections using drones and other photography on iconic buildings, everywhere from the Tower of London to the Guggenheim Museum to the Department of Energy to the Chinese Embassy in Washington. Because Hong Kong is, relatively speaking, a small place. It's halfway around the world from the east coast of America or from London, and it's a big world out there. There are a lot of problems, and we want to keep shining a spotlight on Hong Kong and on the Hong Kong and Chinese leaders who have broken their promises to the people of Hong Kong.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Mark?
Well, I think that we shouldn't forget the people of Hong Kong and the fact that it is still a somewhat more open city than the mainland. We don't want to punish Hong Kongers, most of whom do support democracy, do support a more open society. And we want to do everything we can to ameliorate the conditions, particularly of political prisoners, and to start getting these prisoners out. And anything that your listeners can do to help in that regard and to just keep the focus on Hong Kong, I think everybody in Hong Kong would welcome.
Okay, so when you say you don't want to punish Hong Kongers, there are some people who suggest that maybe we should put sanctions on Hong Kong because of what's going on there, and I guess that would be one way to indirectly punish them. Were you referring to that, or did you mean something else?
That's a great question, Eugene. Our group has supported sanctions for individuals, like, let's say, John Lee, chief executive, but I don't think there's any attempt to kind of punish Hong Kong as a whole or treat it as a pariah. I do think that the international business community needs to take a harder look at the nefarious role that Hong Kong increasingly is playing in laundering money for bad regimes, whether it be North Korea or Russia or Myanmar or Iran, and also the way in which high-value technology is being smuggled through Hong Kong and is being used most notably in the Russian war effort in Ukraine. So, yeah, we'd like to punish Hong Kong companies, and to the extent that it's appropriate, the Hong Kong government for their role in undermining the international order. But we don't have any intention, quite the contrary, of doing anything that would hurt the great majority of Hong Kong people.
So I guess it's very complex and nuanced as everything seems to be in that part of the world. So thank you very much for appearing on RFA Insider, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Great talking to you. Thanks very much. Take care.
You're listening to the RFA Insider podcast, made by two real-life staffers at Radio Free Asia.
If you'd like to send us feedback, there are many ways you can do this.
You can send us an email at insider@rfa.org.
You can comment on our webpage at rfa.org/English/insider. Just click on the episode you're listening to and write your comment below.
Or you can send us a tweet at RFA Insider or visit us in person.
No, don't visit us in person.
Right, don't visit us in person. But anyway, we really want to hear from you.
So tune in every other Friday and we'll take you behind the scenes.
And tell you what the news really means here at RFA Insider. All right, so this is episode 20 of RFA Insider, and we've just had a discussion about the trial of Jimmy Lai in Hong Kong. To keep up with the latest developments in that story, keep an eye on the RFA English website.
But on to something a little bit lighter. This week, the two of us were part of a taste test video here at RFA, so let's have a discussion about it in
Podcast Free Asia! Okay, so today on Podcast Free Asia, it's Kimchi Day. That's right, Kimchi Day is November 22nd. And RFA's very own Lauren Kim, who works with the multimedia team, made an awesome taste testing video asking us to blind taste two batches of kimchi, one from North Korea and another from South Korea. So let's take a quick listen to some of the best parts of that video.
Now that we've made the two different styles of kimchi, let's bring in our taste testers and see what they think.
Cheers. That's nice and hot.
It's more of a gochuri taste more than kimchi, right? Hasn't fermented yet.
Yeah, I'm mainly getting that it's like quite salty, a little spicy.
Next, we'll try the South Korean style kimchi.
I think it's spicier for sure. And like this one feels more delicate, and then this one is like more robust.
In the last one, the spice kind of drowned out any of the flavor, but I can taste more of the flavor in this one because it's not as spicy.
I feel like this is one I usually have.
I love kimchi. I feel like we both have established that we both love kimchi.
Well, there you have it. Regardless of where it's from, kimchi is just kimchi, a food that transcends borders and connects the people of a divided nation.
Okay, and joining us in the studio today is Lauren Kim herself. So great video, Lauren.
Yeah, it was a really fun video.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for having me on today.
Great. So I just wanted to know, like, first, what is Kimchi Day?
So Kimchi Day is November 22nd, as you mentioned, and it started in 2020 in South Korea. They designated that day as National Kimchi Day because, for one, kimchi is mostly traditionally made in the month of November, and it's a very it's a staple of Korean food. It represents Korean food. When you think of kimchi, you think of Korea.
Okay, is there any significance to the date? Because I know in Korea they always have like certain the Korean War started on Yu-Gi-Oh or 625. Is 1122 something, or does that have nothing to do with it?
I mean, Koreans are all for like numerology and putting meaning behind numbers, and so there is some meaning to it.
Okay.
It's kind of difficult to explain in English, but it's kind of like you take each ingredient one by one, and they come together and bring in 22 benefits.
Oh, cool. Okay, I didn't realize that.
Could you tell us the 22 benefits?
I couldn't list all 22 benefits here, but most of them are like related to probiotic health benefits.
Okay.
Because it's high in probiotics. It's also high in like antioxidants and lots of vitamins. So it's really just overall generally good for your health.
I see. Now, is Kimchi Day a thing just in Korea, or is it also in the U.S., or is it more of like a international thing that's everywhere?
So it started out in Korea, like I said, in 2020, but it's kind of been adopted internationally. I know for the U.S., several states have passed like resolutions designating this day and commemorating this day. So states like California, Virginia, New York, places where, the Korean community is kind of substantial.
Right. So the first part of the taste test video is actual making of the North and South style kimchi. Mm-hmm. And while you were observing that, did you see any differences between the two types in terms of like preparation or maybe like flavorings?
Right. The main difference is that North Korean style kimchi is very simple. It's only, I think, 4 or 5 ingredients at most. Obviously you have the salted cabbage, but that's for both. And then you have the julienne radishes, also for both. But where it differs is that North Korean style kimchi has minced garlic and ginger, chili powder that's been soaked in hot water, and then salted shrimp. And then South Korean style kimchi, it has a lot more to enhance flavors and the marinade.
Yeah, I think in discussions with you prior to the taste test video, I heard you say something like that. So I thought that the more simpler tasting kimchi would be the one from North Korea, and the more, punch you in the face style tasting kimchi would be from South Korea. And
right.
I got it wrong. I mean, the North Korean kimchi, in my opinion, was far more flavorful. So maybe there is something to this idea that simple is maybe better. I don't know. Maybe that's just my personal tastes. But no, I was very impressed with what went into the video, and I'm wondering like what exactly gave you the idea to do something like this? Because normally RFA videos are nothing like this style of video that's very conversational and more lighthearted.
Right. You're very right, Eugene. We don't typically do these kind of content for RFA, but it's actually kind of funny how this came into being. I have a desk calendar from H Mart on my desk.
H Mart. Yeah. We're not sponsored by H Mart.
No, we're not. But I was looking at the month of November just to see, what sort of dates or holidays were coming up. And I noticed that November 22nd was Kimchi Day. Mm-hmm. So that kind of already sparked my interest a little bit. And I looked into it. And then it kind of, like a domino effect rippled into like, okay, so I know South Korean kimchi, like by heart, but I don't think I've ever had North Korean style kimchi. And so because of our unique position at RFA where we cover a lot of North Korean stories, I thought it'd be interesting for us to do like a comparison video. And so that's how it came to be.
All right. Out of all the taste testers, who gave the funniest reaction in your opinion?
It's funny. I've been working on this video all day, like all week actually, and I've been looking at everyone's footage. You guys all really impressed me with how you responded. We have such foodies here at RFA. Such sophisticated palates.
Yeah, it was a pleasure to be a part of it, and I hope that maybe is this going to be an annual thing? Will you try it with new people next year on next Kimchi Day?
I don't know. I mean, we could make it an annual thing. We can make it like an RFA thing where we have bring your own cabbage.
Eugene wants more of that North Korean kimchi.
Yeah, definitely. That was really good. But anyway, so in our discussions about this project, you did mention at one time that you have sort of a love-hate relationship with kimchi. And it's pretty obvious that there is a lot to love about it. But what exactly? Why the hate? Why would you say that you hate it in some ways?
I mean, I say love hate, but at the end of the day, I'm Korean, and I can't live without kimchi.
You get the cravings after a while, right? Like if you haven't had it in like 2 or 3 weeks.
Definitely get the cravings. There are certain foods that I absolutely need kimchi for. Like I cannot eat ramen without kimchi.
That makes sense.
It just doesn't work for me. So I do love kimchi. It's just there are times where it can be too overwhelming. So like I can't eat kimchi in the morning because that's like such a strong, overwhelming taste. And it also lingers. So because it's so aggressive, it's just something that I don't like waking up to.
Yeah, my mom gave me a tub of kimchi recently, but she gave it in like those takeout containers with like the hole at the top.
Okay.
So every time I open my fridge in the morning, it just smells like kimchi.
Right, and then you get things like milk that has a hint of kimchi taste in it. And everything.
It just permeates into the fridge. Yep.
I don't know, some people like that. You have chocolate milk, strawberry milk, and kimchi milk, right? No, just kidding. All right. Okay. So there's a lot of times when Korean food is introduced to people in the U.S. and elsewhere, and they always translate the name, and at times very awkwardly. So, for example, we've seen some things like cold beef broth with buckwheat noodles, or I've even seen something like rotten soybean stew or knife noodle soup. And then there's the Korean-style seasoned laver roll. I mean, if you just say the English name, like if you grew up in a Korean setting, it's kind of hard. You have to think about what is that? What does that correspond to? So even now, people are talking about going out for stuff like Korean barbecue, and that's not what Koreans call it. So there's this tendency to have to try to explain and break down what the various dishes are, but we don't see that for other countries' cuisine so much. Like pizza is not tomato cheese bread. Sushi is not slightly fermented raw fish over rice seasoned with a hint of vinegar. Foie gras is not force-fed duck's liver. So why do you think there's this tendency to try to explain Korean food in this way rather than just saying what Koreans call it?
I honestly don't know who started doing that, who started doing the translations for the Korean foods into English. But I do notice that nowadays restaurants and menus are, I think, more are less trying to do literal translations, but actually just sticking to the true name and writing it in English and then having little short descriptions describing the food. But I think initially it was so that it could be a more easily accepted by a more general or broader audience or a Western consumer. Because I think Western cuisines are more familiar and they've been around longer. They've been more mainstream, more worldwide longer. Whereas now we're starting to get more exposure to like Asian cuisines and Asian cultures. And so it's becoming more acceptable. It's becoming more palatable for the Western audience.
Okay.
It's true. And also on the other side, then you see Asian terms for dishes being adopted, but incorrectly, like bao bun.
Oh, right. I guess that makes sense, yes.
Okay, so going off the previous question, you often don't see kimchi explained as Korean pickled cabbage, or at least not anymore. So why do you think kimchi is an exception, in your opinion?
I think, I'm not sure. I feel like it's kind of like on par with like sushi or pho, like we don't describe them anymore. Kimchi has become mainstream. It's become popularized. Kimchi is kimchi. And so people know it as kimchi now.
Yeah, so it's become part of the global culture, or at least the Western culture. So that's why people know what kimchi is, right? And that's a big departure from, I think, when you and I were children, where it was kind of seen as I guess Korean cuisine in general was rather niche, and you had to like know Koreans to know anything about it. But so this was a really great video, and we wanted to thank you again for inviting us to be part of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for being part of it.
Yeah, we will put that in the show notes for this episode. So if our listeners want to see that, you can go to the website rfa.org/English/insider, and you can watch it there. Of course, it'll also be hosted on our YouTube account and the RFA main site. So thank you very much for joining us, Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up next is The Rundown.
The Rundown.
All right, The Rundown. So I think, Amy, you should go first because mine's going to be quite long. But what do you have for us today?
All right. Eugene, do you have any experience in your youth backpacking in Southeast Asia?
No, I've actually never been to Southeast Asia, so no.
What?
But I was in the Boy Scouts, and I have done backpacking before.
Okay.
But that's like hiking in the mountains, so I don't think that's what you're talking about, right?
No, we're talking about going to like Chiang Mai with a backpack and just like...
No experience. Do you have experience doing that?
A little bit. Maybe not like backpacking per se, but like traveling through a bit of Southeast Asia.
Okay. Where did you go?
I was in Thailand, Cambodia, and then Vietnam.
Okay, cool. I think the farthest south that could be considered Southeast Asia that I went was Okinawa, which isn't really Southeast Asia.
Okay.
I mean, that's right next to Hong Kong, actually. So.
Taiwan.
Yeah, Taiwan, actually. Sorry, I'm confused. Yes, right next to Taiwan. All right, guys, look. I knew it was next to Taiwan. It's just, we were talking about Hong Kong today, and it was just on the mind. I'm not dumb. Okay, maybe I am, but...
I would say the most backpacker-esque trip I had was we stayed in a guest house in Vietnam for like $10 a night, but it was like an 18-bed sort of hostel room.
I do have the experience of staying in a hostel for $10 a night, but that was in New York City, and that was pretty awful. Like, this is around like 2004-ish, and like you basically want to sleep with your suitcase because you don't want someone to steal it from you. But I'm sure your experience was much better than that.
No, it was about the same.
Okay. All
right. So I asked because news has come out of Laos that 5 young backpackers have died and several others remain hospitalized in serious condition after a night out in Laos.
Night out. So they went out and they were drinking in bars?
Yes.
Okay.
So the backpackers were staying in the town of Vang Vieng, which is a popular stop on the Southeast Asia backpacker circuit. So, to paint a picture of the town, the main street is like packed with guest houses, bars, and restaurants. And then you can also go tubing and kayaking on the nearby Namsong River and trekking and ziplining in the mountains.
Okay.
So not a small number of tourists have also died after tubing under the influence. So it's like
I could see that.
That kind of destination.
Have you been tubing before?
In the snow. But not in the
snow
river.
tubing. Yeah, I did river tubing, and actually, like, that's very energy intensive. You have to be focused also, especially if you're in like rapids, because you got the rocks and everything, and then you can't really kick with your legs because you're in the tube, so you kind of have to like...
Oh, just navigate.
You got to use your arms a lot. And then also the tube's made of rubber, so you're going to chafe your biceps if you don't do it with the right technique. And if you're pretty wasted, I'm pretty sure the right technique is difficult. So I could see that. You shouldn't drink and tube. Definitely not.
Yes. Okay. So on the night of November 12th, the victims went out drinking, and the majority of them stayed in the same guest house, Nana Backpackers Hostel. So the guest house staff noticed that they hadn't checked out the next morning, and they went to check, and that's when they saw that the victims had fallen ill, and so they rushed them to the hospital.
Okay.
So 2 Danish women in their 20s were the first to pass away shortly after being admitted to the hospital.
Oh my.
And then in the following days, a young British lawyer, an Australian teenager, and an American national also succumbed.
Okay, they just had some drinks, right?
Yeah, they just went out drinking and then came back to the hostel, went to sleep, and then...
How much did they drink? Wow.
Well, that's what you would think, but... So, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs released a statement confirming the 2 deaths, and they said little else. But RFA Laos confirmed with police that at least one of the Danish tourists had died as a result of poisoning, and that several other foreign tourists were being treated for the same thing.
Oh, so they were poisoned?
Yes. So
police... Wait, somebody poisoned their alcohol?
Well, police said that they're currently investigating whether the cause was methanol poisoning. Do you know what methanol is?
Yes. Okay, so the alcohol that humans drink is ethanol.
Yes.
And only in small percentages. So like if you look at vodka or something, I think it's like, I don't know, 40% at the most. And then most wine is around 12% and beer is around 5%. But that's ethanol. That's with 2 carbons. I used to be chemistry major.
Whoa, I had a whole chemistry lesson written out, but it's not needed.
No,
apparently.
go ahead with the chemistry lesson because maybe our listeners don't have a chemistry background.
Okay,
yes.
so
2 hydrocarbons rather than 1. Right.
Could you confirm methanol is the simplest form of alcohol?
I would say that that's true because it contains 1 carbon atom and 1 OH and 3 hydrogens.
Okay.
I could even draw it like so.
This means nothing to someone who barely passed chem.
So you got an OH here and then, okay, anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's completely clear and smells just like drinking alcohol, but it's used only in household and industrial products like paint stripper, antifreeze, and insecticides.
Yeah, and definitely not to drink.
Yes.
Okay.
So in some places, particularly in like touristy destinations, methanol is sometimes added to drinks because it's much cheaper than ethanol, which is the alcohol that we can drink.
Yes. And that has 2...
Eugene is diagramming as we speak.
And it has two carbon atoms and an OH and 5 hydrogens. So that's ethanol.
So
sorry, I'm geeking out.
Drinking as little as a shot of methanol can basically kill you.
And these people had more than just a shot.
We can assume.
Okay.
And well, under investigation. But basically, methanol can kill you because when you drink it, it turns into formaldehyde and then formic acid in your body. And that turns your blood acidic and basically stops your body from breathing properly.
That's not good.
The symptoms don't hit until around 12 hours after you drink it. And then they're quite similar to being very drunk, which is kind of dangerous. You can't tell.
Because if they're similar, then they'll just think, oh, he just had too much to drink.
Yes,
but actually, their life is in jeopardy.
So some of the symptoms include nausea, vomiting, difficulty breathing, blindness, and seizures.
Blindness?
Yes.
That's not good.
So if you suspect that you've ingested methanol, obviously you need to get yourself to the hospital immediately. And in serious cases, you need to start dialysis.
Yeah, I guess you could suffer from kidney failure from that. Huh? Yeah,
so if you find yourself in a sticky situation, so say you're in like a really remote touristy town far away from the hospital, or the town you're in doesn't have the specific drugs used to treat methanol poisoning, can you guess what the next best thing to do would be?
Pray?
Yes. Well, yes. So basically, you should start chugging ethanol. That is drinking alcohol like whiskey and vodka.
You want to drink more alcohol when you're suffering from severe alcohol poisoning?
Methanol poisoning.
Oh, okay. Right, but still, that's counterintuitive. Like, you think you want to like induce vomiting or something like that.
You would think.
Yeah.
But the key is basically to distract your liver. So you want to give it a lot of ethanol to process first. Okay. So it doesn't immediately start breaking down the methanol into formaldehyde and formic acid.
I see. And then you get to the hospital and then they can take it out.
Yes.
Okay.
So
that's interesting. Don't just drink ethanol. You gotta still get to the hospital.
Yes, but
hopefully somebody can take you there.
In the stickiest of situations, that's what you should start doing.
Okay.
So currently, another Australian teenager is still fighting for her life in the hospital following this incident. And most of the victims were staying at the Nana backpacker hostel, which I mentioned before, but the hostel owner was adamant that he didn't add any methanol to his drinks at the bar.
Well, how did it get there?
Exactly. Well, and he said police already came to check his bar and like the stores with which he bought the liquor from.
Okay.
So the investigation is still ongoing, but online backpacker groups are warning people right now to avoid mixed drinks and local spirits in Vang Vieng and stick to canned beers, ciders, and bottled wine.
No, this is really scary, like, because, anybody who goes on a trip does not suspect that if they're going to have a drink in a place that it's going to have methanol
and you
in
couldn't tell the difference, right? It smells the exact same.
It's going to smell the same. I mean, it sounds like maybe somebody accidentally, like you said, put paint thinner in there or something, which that sounds awful, terrible.
Yeah, and it doesn't just happen in like more obscure places, right? It's happened in like Bali and Mexico, Turkey.
Mexico, wow, okay. Okay, at the time that this was recorded, only 5 people had died from methanol poisoning in Laos. But since then, we've learned that the 6th person has also died in this tragedy. Let's move right along. There's no good segue between that kind of tragedy and what we're going to talk about next. But our next discussion is about martial arts. So I'd like to say that most people's introduction to martial arts comes through movies or video games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not actually doing them. So, quick hot take. What's your favorite martial arts movie? And what's your favorite martial arts video game?
I fear we have either a generation or a gender gap between us because I don't have a favorite martial arts movie or martial arts video game.
Really? Not at all?
I've only ever watched The Karate Kid, but the new one with Jaden Smith.
Oh, that's your favorite then?
By default, I suppose it is.
And then also you were a fan of the Power Rangers before, right? With your pink Power Ranger costume.
Well, I don't think I really understood who the Power Rangers were at that age.
Okay.
Maybe like Street Fighter, if that counts.
Yes,
because that's
Street
the
Fighter does
only
count.
video game that I played.
So you played Street Fighter 2?
The one on GameCube.
I don't know which one. Maybe 3 or 4. I'm not sure. So for me, my favorite martial arts movie to this date is called Best of the Best.
Wow.
This one had, it had James Earl Jones as the U.S. karate head coach in a role that he was just kind of phoning it in.
Mm-hmm.
And then it had like a bunch of people. They were actually studying a Korean martial art called Taekwondo, but they still referred to it as the karate team, right?
Mm.
And then midway through the movie, they started calling it the way they should. The story of this is very convoluted, but I just like it because it's all about this kid who the Korean team killed his brother in a competition when he was a kid. And so then his whole life he's growing up fearing and hating this Korean fighter that he's also Korean American. I got to say that. So he grows up and he wants to get revenge for his brother on this guy that killed his brother.
Mm.
And so he joins the karate team and he works his way up. He's the best fighter. And then they have this competition in Korea and he's supposed to fight the guy who killed his brother. And then something happens, and the only way that he can win the fight somehow would be to kill him because he's knocked him out so badly that he needs to get one more point, and to get that one more point, he'd have to do this move that would be lethal. You know, it doesn't make sense because you could just tap the guy and it wouldn't matter. You'd still win. But then he decides not to kill him, and because of that, the U.S. team ends up losing. And then the opposing fighter from the Korean team comes to him and says that he has been living with this shame and guilt of having killed his brother unintentionally in competition, and he's very sorry for that. And he thanks him for having mercy on him during their match. And so he decides that he's going to give him his gold medal instead, because actually the American team should have won if not for this guy showing mercy. And so then he offers himself to the American fighter as, I'll be your new brother, and everybody's happy at the end.
Wow, that's more touching than I would expect from
Right. I'm like sitting here like crying when I saw it, and at the age of, it came out in 86, but I didn't see it until the 90s. And then my friend at the time said, are you crying over this really awful martial arts movie? What the is wrong with you? But no, it was very touching.
I do want to add, my dad is from Hong Kong, so he made me watch Ip Man.
What's that?
It's like a series. What? It's like a series of like famous Hong Kong martial arts movies.
Oh, okay.
But we were watching like Ip Man 3 or something.
I thought you said It Man.
Oh,
no. Okay. All right. And then my favorite martial arts game is called Tekken 3. Have you heard of the Tekken series? Probably
Vaguely.
Not. Okay. So Tekken is a video game put out by Namco, which is a Japanese company. And so there was one character in Tekken 3. He's a Korean character, one of the first Korean video game characters ever. But the thing is, all the other characters had normal names like Paul, Michelle, Kazuya, which is a very common Japanese name. And there was somebody called Lei Wulong, which was a kind of Jackie Chan clone doing drunken style. But they had this Korean fighter, and his name was Hwarang, which translates as flower boy, right? And this is alluding to, you could also translate it as flowering male youth. And this is a term that they used to refer to elite warriors of the kingdom of Shilla in Korean history. But that's not a given name, right? So if you're going to give everybody else normal names, but you're going to call the Korean guy Hwarang, it's like if you had a Japanese character and you just decided to call him, oh, your name is Samurai, and people refer to him like that, right?
I would argue that's more suitable for a fighting game than like having Paul or Michelle.
Well, I mean, the premise of the game is that people are in this worldwide fighting tournament. So yes, you would have somebody named Paul in there because the American guy is Paul. Michelle's actually, interestingly, she's Native American, but she's also Chinese because she was adopted by a Native American tribe somehow.
Okay.
And then Kazuya is like, he's the heir to this multinational corporation that hosts the whole tournament, and he has all this stuff with his father who's evil, and also he's evil, and he's also part devil. But anyway, getting beyond that, they all do different kinds of martial arts, and this was a really interesting game that I like to play a lot in college.
Okay.
But now let's go beyond video games and movies. Have you ever studied any martial arts?
We talked about this before, but I did karate for about 3 months, and I achieved white belt yellow stripe.
White belt yellow stripe. So
Yes.
that's you were promoted once, then, I
Yes.
assume. Okay, that's what
Before
that is.
the free voucher ran out.
And you pronounced it karate like we do in America, but the correct pronunciation is karate. No, anyway, I'm not going to get on your grill for that. I also did study martial arts. I studied Taekwondo in the 1980s. I'm not really sure what got me into it. I think, I was probably around second or third grade, just seen the Karate Kid, not the Karate Kid. It's called the Karate Kid, people. I thought, I want to try that. And in my town, there was a Taekwondo school. And so I signed up and I made it all the way up to blue belt, which, you said you got to white belt yellow stripe. This one, we didn't have a yellow stripe. It went from white to yellow, then yellow with a green stripe, and then green with a blue stripe, and then blue. And I made it as far as blue, and then I decided to quit because I didn't like going to the Taekwondo dojang every, I guess, other day. And it was getting kind of annoying, and I was a kid, and I wanted to watch TV and stuff, or go to my friend's house. So that's why I quit. But, yes.
So why exactly are we talking about Taekwondo?
That's a good question. This is going to be a very long and very meandering discussion, so buckle up. All right. Last week, one of the official governing bodies of the sport of Taekwondo decided to change the name of one of its practice patterns because it wants to get on board with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's moves to scrub the term tongil, which means unification, from the North Korean vocabulary.
Okay, I have so many questions right now.
So let's try to answer these in order.
You said one of the governing bodies of the sport, so there's more than one.
Yes. There is more than one. This one is not easy to answer. The short answer is that there are two disciplines. The long answer is that one of those disciplines has several factions.
Okay, that raises more questions.
Right. So we'll make this a subset of the previous list of questions. So let's start with question 1A.
Okay. So why are there two disciplines? Is that because of like North-South Korea?
Actually, yes, but yes and no, actually. Okay, so that's what a lot of people will say if you ask them that one is North Korean and one is South Korean, but I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at it. So in order to explain this thoroughly, we're going to have to go back in time to the 1950s.
Are you doing that music for decades thing again?
Of course. Okay, I was going to do that, but then when I actually started doing it, it just didn't feel right because we're not talking about the United States here, so it would be weird to put American music from the 1950s when we're talking about South Korea in the 1950s. So we're going to do it without the music. So back in the 1950s, South Korean General Chae Hong-hee, who had been making a new fighting style by combining self-defense techniques from Japanese karate and several other Korean and East Asian martial arts, he coined the term for his fighting style as Taekwondo, the way of the foot and the fist. And as we said, it was borrowing elements from many different martial arts styles from all over Asia, and it had become immensely popular in South Korea, and it began to spread elsewhere. In 1966, General Chae established the International Taekwondo Federation, or ITF, with its headquarters in Seoul, and it would serve as the sole governing body of the sport.
Okay, so then I'm assuming North Korea countered and set up like a rival organization?
Now hold your horses there. So General Chae was intent on spreading Taekwondo to the rest of the world through the ITF, and so this organization had set up its offices in many different countries. And he didn't really care much for ideology, and he just wanted to teach people willing to learn Taekwondo, regardless of the current Cold War political situation. So this became a huge problem for the South Korean government when Chae expressed his desire to bring the International Taekwondo Federation to North Korea, where he was originally from.
Honestly, I think that's kind of admirable, wanting to like spread the sport despite.
Right.
Okay, so he was a North Korean who became a South Korean general.
Yeah, well, that's yes, but also no, because we need to elaborate more. He was born in what is now North Korea before the division between North and South. So yes, he was born in what is now North Korea, but he wasn't a citizen of the country of North Korea. At least not yet.
Wait, what?
Okay, I'll get there. Hold on. So by the time we get to the 1970s, General Che had grown to be he was disgruntled with the South Korean government for letting politics to get in the way of the growing of his sport. So it was having mass international appeal, but they were still blocking him from going into North Korea. So he went into voluntary exile in Canada in 1972, moving the International Taekwondo Federation headquarters to Toronto. And then the following year, South Korea abandoned the ITF completely and set up the World Taekwondo Federation, also known at the time as WTF.
WTF is that? No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
We'll get to that later.
No,
we will get to that later. So the Toronto-based ITF held its first World Championships in 1974, and over the rest of the decade, it expanded throughout Europe, North America, and the Pacific, and, of course, to North Korea. Then in 1979, General Che, who had fought against North Korea in the Korean War, visited North Korea and ended up staying for good. And then the 1980s came around. Okay, I lied. I'm going to put the 80s music here because now we're actually talking about the whole rest of the world, not just Korea. And then the 1980s came around, and I think the popularity of Asian martial arts in the West exploded, bolstered by hit films such as Bloodsport, The Karate Kid, and American Ninjas 1, 2, and 3. Have you heard of it?
1, 2, and 3, no.
Well, actually, American Ninja goes up to, I think, 6 or 7. But if we're talking specifically about the 80s, then it goes up to 3.
Okay.
And it's a really awful movie, but it's so bad that it's good.
Is this what inspired American Ninja Warrior?
I don't think so. I think that's more of an American Gladiators thing. I'm not sure.
Sure. Okay, this is intriguing, but we are not making a documentary about the history of Taekwondo. So can we wrap this up?
Okay, so sure. So 4 major things will happen in the 1980s. Number 1, General Che leads an ITF exhibition to Pyongyang in 1980, and he invites some of his top students to go give an exhibition on Taekwondo in North Korea.
Okay.
Number 2, this is the same year that the International Olympic Committee recognizes the WTF, the rival organization, as the governing body of the sport.
Out of curiosity, which one is bigger at this point?
At that point, I would say that because South Korea was getting bigger worldwide, the WTF was getting bigger. And also at the time, a lot of South Korean people were emigrating to other countries throughout the 70s and 80s and set up lots of schools.
Okay.
In 1985, the ITF headquarters was moved to Vienna, Austria. That is because Austria is a neutral country, and it's easier for General Che, who is now a citizen of North Korea, to lead the global organization from Vienna rather than from Canada, because Canada is more or less aligned with the opposite side of the Cold War from North Korea. Okay, and then in 1988, Taekwondo, the WTF variety of Taekwondo, makes its debut as an exhibition sport at the Seoul Olympics.
Okay.
All right, and stop the music. I'll try to wind this up. 1992, Taekwondo is a demonstration sport in Barcelona. In 1996, in the Atlanta Olympics, there's no Taekwondo. But in 2000, it becomes a full-fledged Olympic sport, and it's contested every 4 years. Okay? Now, South Korea is always dominating Taekwondo in the Olympics. You would expect that. It's their sport, right?
Right.
But North Korea has never sent any Taekwondo athletes.
Out of principle?
No, well, because the style of Taekwondo in the Olympics is WT, or WTF. And then, it was WTF. I'll get into that later. But people who learn Taekwondo in North Korea only learn ITF. So
interesting. So I was under the impression it was kind of just a difference by name, but it's difference in technique.
Yes.
Okay.
Meanwhile, North Korea is always dominating in the World Championships hosted by the ITF, which South Korea never sends any of its athletes to.
Gotcha.
So, they're both the best country in Taekwondo, but it depends on which Taekwondo you're talking about. All right, now here's the problem. In 2002, General Che passes away, and this caused a split in the ITF because 3 separate people held a claim to the organization's presidency. One was Che's son, who had been president in name, but the general had actually been leading the organization as kind of a regent, I guess. Another was a successor that was handpicked by North Korea because they wanted to get their guy on there to, espouse their ideology. And then the third one was neither of these, but the person designated by the ITF constitution in the event of a sitting president's death. So it's split into 3 organizations, and each of them claim to be the legitimate governing body, and the one currently backed by North Korea is the one headquartered in Vienna.
Okay. Is that the biggest one?
I'm not sure about the relative size of them, but I think at the time there was one faction in Vienna, another faction somewhere in Poland, I think, and then the third one is in Toronto.
Okay.
Then in 2017, we're fast forwarding a lot, WTF, the World Taekwondo Federation, which is the rival organization that is, I guess, sanctioned by South Korea, decides that they're going to change the name of the organization from World Taekwondo Federation to World Taekwondo.
Okay.
And drop the F because of the popularity of the WTF internet slang.
I see.
So now it's just WT.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the answer to question 1. What's your next question?
Okay. I think I forgot what we were talking about.
All right. Well, we'll just end here then. So that ends. No, just kidding.
Wow.
Other media outlets will leave out that long story and just generally say, well, ITF is North Korean and WT is South Korean, but that's not entirely accurate. And the ITF, while it is the governing body recognized by the North Korean government, the fact remains that it is an organization created by a South Korean general who founded the sport, and it was originally headquartered in Seoul. So you can't simply say that the ITF is North Korean. Furthermore, there's factions.
Okay.
Yeah.
So earlier I mentioned that it seemed like the difference was only a name, but that wasn't true.
Yeah.
So what are the major differences between the 2 styles of Taekwondo?
Well, I'm unfortunately not well-versed enough in either version to tell you what exactly the differences are, but I can tell you what some of the cosmetic differences are.
Okay.
So World Taekwondo spells Taekwondo in Roman letters without a hyphen. So it's all one word. Meanwhile, the International Taekwondo Federation uses a hyphen between Taekwon and Do. So usually on the ITF uniforms, if you see them, you'll see Taekwon-Do on the back. Also, the uniform tends to have black trim, and it'll have a long black stripe that goes down the leg. So it looks a little more stylish. So again, let's talk more about how I became aware of this. We're going to go back to that video game Tekken 3 that I was talking about. The poorly named character Hwarang, he's wearing a uniform with black trim and stripes.
So he's a student of ITF.
Kind of, because he's from South Korea, so that doesn't quite add up. But so when I got into the game, I noticed this, and I thought, gee, that's a different uniform than what I wore. And his fighting stance also, he has his fists up kind of below his neck near his chest, like this. And when I was studying Taekwondo, I was doing WT, the WT version or the WTF version. And you kind of have like your left hand forward and your right hand is more close to your navel. So it's a different fighting stance. And I was like, well, that doesn't look like what I learned. So what is he doing, So years later, I learned why this was. It's because Tekken, the Tekken series, was one of the first fighting games to use a motion capture to create the lifelike movements of the fighters. So all of Hwarang's original moves had been performed by a martial artist with sensors all over his body, right? So Tekken is a product of Namco, which is a Japanese company, and the ITF actually does have a strong presence in Japan. So the guy doing Hwarang's moves is a guy named Hwang Soo-il, who is a grandmaster in ITF Taekwondo who lives in Japan. And he's really up there in the sport. He either is or was at one time the Japan national team coach.
Interesting.
So Hwarang is in fact doing ITF Taekwondo, and that is why so much about him was different from what I remembered, having studied under then WTF rules.
Okay, that is kind of fun to learn.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so let's bring this back to the story that we were talking about, because we're getting too far off tangent. Yeah. So you said one of the governing bodies of Taekwondo is changing the name of patterns?
Yeah, so the ITF based in Vienna is changing the name of the tongil pattern.
Okay, before I ask you what tongil is, can you first explain what patterns are?
Okay, sure. So when this story was being pitched, this changing of pattern was misunderstood by some people to mean that ITF was going to change its logo, but no, that's not what it's mean. It's not about patterns on the uniform or anything. So a pattern, also known as a tol or a pumse in Korean, is a series of prearranged attacks or blocks learned in a specific order, and it's meant for practice. In my admittedly limited experience with Taekwondo, you have to learn a new pattern in preparation for advancement to the next level, and each new pattern contains more advanced moves. So, for example, the first WT pattern is like this. So you start in the ready stance. Maybe you'll turn to your left and block low with your left hand and punch with the right, then turn 180 degrees, block low with the right hand and punch with the left, turn 90 degrees to the left, block low with the left hand and punch with the right, and then turn to the right 90 degrees and execute a middle block with the left hand, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just basically a series of moves that you always have to do it in that order, and you have to memorize the order. And when you master it, then you can advance to the next level, and it has all the techniques that you need to learn for that level.
Okay.
That's just the first pattern in WT, and it only involves 2 kicks. Most of the emphasis on the first pattern is on blocking because you'll be more blocking than attacking when you're at a low level. And the next pattern, it might introduce more types of kicks and blocks, and the one after that will introduce even more complicated moves, et cetera, et cetera. But like I said, you have to learn new patterns every time you advance. But each of these patterns, they have names. And in WT, their patterns are called taeguk. Taeguk is the symbol inside the Korean flag, the kind of yin and yang symbol. And they just number them 1 through 8. Okay. And then the black belt patterns, those are named after Buddhist concepts. Meanwhile, the ITF, which has completely different patterns, so patterns that with different choreography than the WT, these follow different naming conventions also. In the ITF, they're named after Korean historical figures like generals and kings, but there are a few that aren't. So there's a Juche pattern, and Juche is the founding ideology of North Korea, and it preaches about self-reliance. There's also a Samil pattern, and Samil means 3-1. That's the date of the March 1st movement, which was a series of protests in March 1919, protesting against colonial Japanese rule.
Oh, okay.
So that happened all over Korea, which was one undivided colony at the time, and massive protests against Japanese rule. So that's an important Korean cultural thing. And then finally, the subject of today's story, there's another pattern that does not have a general or king's name, and that's the tongil pattern. And tongil means unification.
Okay, so why would North Korea want to get rid of the unification pattern?
That is an excellent question because for most of modern Korean history, both sides have stated that unification or reunification rather is the main goal of the country.
Right.
But late last year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has been distancing North Korea from the South, declaring that the people of North and South Korea are not the same people. And then this year, North Korea even defined the South as a hostile enemy country. And then it started cracking down on certain words, and tongil became a banned word. So this is ironic because there's hundreds of patriotic propaganda songs that use this word, and each of those are now banned. So you're not allowed to sing this propaganda song about reunification anymore.
Okay.
There was also a tongil station on the Pyongyang subway, and it had its name changed first to just station.
Station.
Yeah, they just crossed out the tongil part. And then they changed it to Moranbong Station, which is the name of a famous hill with Moranbong. All of this distancing is response to the more hardline administration in South Korea and likely the Biden administration being less willing to engage in one-on-one dialogue with Kim Jong-un and improving military cooperation between the United States, South Korea, and Japan. So, long story short, because of current geopolitics, tongil is out in the ITF faction based in Vienna. The pattern will be called the Changwon pattern, and Changwon is the pen name of General Che, who is the founder of ITF Taekwondo. The organization claims that the reasoning behind this is because they want to emphasize General Che as the founder because he isn't getting his due credit.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there are other factions of the ITF. So were they in agreement with this change?
That's kind of hard to track down official statements because actually it's kind of hard to find because they're all don't mention each other, and it's hard to say who's accurate and who's not, and some of them don't have websites, so it's kind of hard to track down official statements from the other organizations on this at all. But RFA Korean did talk to ITF champion Michael Cormack, who was one of General Che's students who traveled with him to North Korea in 1980. He's from Canada, for that exhibition that I talked about earlier. And he thinks the name change is a bad move. And he said that the Vienna ITF's reason is nonsense because the tongil pattern, that's like for 6th degree black belts. And by then, every student knows who General Che is. So you're not trying to educate them that, no, this is a sport made by General Che. So he said that General Che created Taekwondo for many reasons. One of his deepest reasons was for the eventual reunification of his country. So the name of the pattern was deliberately chosen to emphasize that it was a goal to unify. And I don't know for sure if there's anything to this, but it's a hunch I have because in the course of writing this, in the text version, I had to watch a video to describe how to do it. And, it starts out with a lot of twin moves. There's something called a double front punch and then a double side knife hand. And so it's a lot of double moves at first. And then over the course of the pattern, it ends with more single moves. So it's like in many ways two becoming one.
I see.
So that's what I thought. That's what I gathered from it. I don't know if there's anything to that, but that's just what I thought. That's why it was called the unification pattern, because it's unifying two parts of one whole.
Okay, we'll have to link the video so people can decide.
Yeah, sure. So in a way, I would say that it symbolizes unification in that way.
It's like ironic and a little sad that General Choi didn't want politics to affect the sport so much, but then it did, and in the process, they changed the tongil pattern to in his name for his honor.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what he disliked.
That's true.
And moved away from.
And also at the same time, it's also kind of sad. I think if South Korea had originally just said, yeah, let's do some cross-cultural exchange, and you teach ITF or you teach Taekwondo in North Korea, then we'd only have one body, and there wouldn't be all this infighting amongst all the different bodies and everything, right?
Right.
Similarly, I think we can't say that General Choi is totally without fault here because I think that maybe he decided to just go to North Korea after the rival World Taekwondo Federation, or WT now, started gaining popularity in the world. He's like, well, fine. Well, then I'm just going to go to North Korea then, because they're politicizing it with this organization, so I better just create a balance, or whatever reasoning he had. Obviously, the North Koreans didn't want to just do it just for the sake of bettering the world. They're going to try to put their stamp on it too. So
true, and it's probably hard or probably impossible to avoid politicization when it's like a sport that defines like you as a country.
Yeah, indeed. But this has been a very, very long conversation. I hope that everybody here, we haven't lost anybody, and we talked about video games in there as well, and martial arts movies, and even certain propaganda songs that are having this word ironically banned, because it's propaganda, so it shouldn't be, I don't know. It's just very, very confusing, long, meandering talk. And, when we pitched this story originally, I was just like, yeah, this is going to be fun and exciting. And in the middle of it, I was like, oh, why did I choose this? Because I had to do so much research. And because I didn't want to just simply say, well, ITF is North Korean and WT is South Korean, because that's not totally accurate. But with that, let's end this episode of RFA Insider. For Emily, I'm Eugene Huang, and we will see you next time.
See ya.
Like what you heard today? It would really mean a lot to us if you would like, subscribe, or follow this podcast. You can also share it on social media or even text messages. Feeling frisky? Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or elsewhere. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you here for the next episode of RFA Insider. Sure? Yeah. All right.
Mark Clifford, who is president of the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong, about the trial of a Hong Kong... Oh my God. I didn't write that out right.
But it was a way to promote kimchi, the kimchi industry. Can we start over again?
That's fine. It's fine. Website at... What is that? rfa.org/English/insider. Is that correct? So in 1966, with that, let's end this episode of RFA Insider. Let's end this Insider. Is it Passover?
I feel so frazzled today.
I know, because we're...